So, how are you, friends? How have you been? So, today I have thought of us maybe passing through file handling. So that we can know how you can write proper code, and how you manipulate your files, how you deal with the synchronous operations and errors while you are building your applications and are dealing with files. Well, you can argue with me, Dennis, why do you have to teach us programming and we have AI tools that can build an entire system? There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to understand what is happening behind the hood. Remember, these AI tools, sometimes they do make mistakes. And these mistakes may not be syntax issue that may make your application to break, or maybe a logical issue, but sometimes these errors may be optimization issues. So, in as far as your application is working, it may not be working as expected because there's a lot of optimization errors that are there in your application. So, understanding the theory behind what is happening is very key in understanding development so that you become a more and more productive developer. It wouldn't make sense you are just integrating codes from various AI tools like Cursor, like ChatGPT, like Perplexity, integrating, amalgamating this code, then coming up with an entire application. You cannot explain what is this code of yours doing. So understanding the theory behind what is happening is very key. These AI tools are not there to stop us from learning. These AI tools are there to make us more productive and to make us more faster in whatever we are doing. So they are not there maybe to pull us away from learning. Remember, AI tools can make you dumb if you are not serious. Okay? So they are there to make your work more easier and more faster. But you have to understand what is happening. So you have to learn. And then after learning, you can make good use of them. Maybe when you're working under pressure and you are working on a very tight deadline, you can maybe apply them and then crash your system in a very short period of time. So with that said, I thought of us maybe passing through file handling, and for that reason, I thought that this this topic is going to be a little bit broad. And for that reason, I thought of coming up with a playlist-based way of doing the programming. So what I decided to do now is I've decided now this one is going to be a playlist whereby we are going to do with async, synchronous, file handling, read, write, append, all of that, check whether file exists, all of that. Then there will be now uploading files using something like, maybe if you are using Node.js, using Malta, then we'll be now seeing how we can interact with the cloud-based storage platforms like Firebase or S3 buckets. Now, with that said, we can begin our today's adventure. So you are all welcomed, and you can maybe pass through the channel and look at more stuff that is more educative and more enlightening. I have passed through state management where I have explained how to use context API Next.js. It also applies to the same in something like React. Then I've also applied on how I've also explained on how to work with state management properly using Redux toolkit, both in Next.js using TypeScript, but it's just the same way in JavaScript. Yeah, it's just the same from Next.js and React. But when you understand all these concepts, you just find out that they are applicable in all of our frameworks. It's just the same way, it's just the same concept, but written in a different way. So we now, of that is said, you can subscribe to my channel for more and more content like this. So today we can begin our adventure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open the terminal, then I'm going to say cd desktop, cd, and I'm going to cd YouTube, and I'm going to make directory, which directory? I'm going to call it file handling. Let's see whether it is there. Okay, cd file handling. Then I can now say I want to open this directory using VS Code. Then I'm going to click code, then dot. Then I can minimize now this terminal here. I just say minimize it, and our file folder has been opened. So I have a lot of water here that I'm taking. I like coding and I'm drinking water. So with that said, I can now come here and say index, can create a file, can create a folder, I call it 1.1. Then from here I can create a file, call it index.js. Then from here I can create another file called index, let me see, index.txt. Now, number one, you have to understand before we start the application that there is a developer who has already coded a library to deal with files. So we are going to work with a certain module called fs, that is called stream, require fs abbreviation of stream. We are also going to work with another module called path. Path is equals to require path. These modules are provided by default by Node.js. We don't have to install them. So with that said, now we are going to look at asynchronous. We are going to start with the read operations. And for the read operations, we are going to start with synchronous way. Now, when you say something is synchronous, it simply means that it follows a certain process. So there is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 4, number 5. So for you, before you come number 5, you have to pass number 2. And before you come number 3, you have to pass number 2. And before you come number 4, you have to pass number 3. It follows a certain systematic process. So in synchronous programming, there are no tasks that can run as the background while others are running. Okay? So one task, we say that in synchronous programming, that a flow in a certain, maybe a code block can bring to an entire system down because it breaks the flow of execution. And we can see that one from our demonstration today. So I'm going to say try catch error. Then I'm going to have this, I'm going to say Dennis is a good engineer. Good engineer, like that. Then with that, I can now come here and say, we want to read from that file. I can say const data is equals to const data is equals to f dot read file sync. Then I can now come here and define this file we are working with. Then I can say let file name is equals to path dot join directory name, and from that I can say the file is called index.txt. You see, now with that I can now come here and say we are going to read from that file name. Then of course we have to have UTF-8 that way. Then with that I can now come, if there is an error, you can catch it and say console.log was an error while reading. And I can now come here and say, print the error. Say error, I believe is an object. Then I assess the value of message like that. Then with this I can now come here and say console.log data that way. Then with that I can now come here and run. I can see D1. Then with this I can now say node index. So Dennis is a good engineer. Now this one is a synchronous way. How are we going to know it's a synchronous way? I'm going to comment this. Then I'm going to add a problem here. I'm going to say console.log not done. Let's see, let me just remove this. Let me show you something. Let me just uncomment this, uncomment this, uncomment this. Then I'm going to say console.log synchronous operation. Then with that said, I'm going to execute this, and it says, now you see it has followed a certain process. Because it's synchronous, this add first to be executed, this add to be executed, then our last code here, our last code here. Now what is the danger of that? If I'll come here and say, add this and I add y, you see that one is an invalid file, it will still execute. You see, if I do that, it will still execute, but this one is executing. This has executed, but there's an error, and this one is executing. It's because I have already caught this error here. I have caught this error. If I comment this and I comment this and I say run, you'll find out that it cannot work because this one is a synchronous operation and a certain error has blocked the flow of execution. So I'm going to uncomment it and I'm going to uncomment it like that. Like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this one like that. Now, that's how synchronous operation works while you're dealing with the files. Now, let me just carry this one. I'm going to cut this. I'm going to say data, and I'm going to append it here. Synchronous operation. Then I'm going to say, now let us read from this data synchronously. So what we are going to asynchronously. Let us read from this file asynchronously. So what happens is very simple. I'm going to say fs dot read file file name like that, file name. Then I'm going to say utf8. This I'm going to return, remove this y so that it can work. Then I'm going to say data. I'm going to say error data. Then this we are going to return. If there is an error, I've run when I was using PHP some time ago. I used to handle errors first before working with the true statement. And my approach in programming is that I handle the errors first. So if that error, what will happen is console.log data read console.log data. What we are going to do is console.log if I remove this and see console.log data, and just append it to console.log maybe data. Then with this I can say, can come here, console.log, I'm doing a lot of mistakes. It's supposed to be down here. Then I can say console.log an error. Then with that I can maybe print the error. It will be message. Then with that I can return like that. Return like that. So I can now come here and say what? Console.log asynchronous demonstration. Synchronous demonstration. With that I can now run our setup, our application, and I can say, see, asynchronous demonstration. What has happened? You see this buffer, I can now come and remove this buffer. Can come here and say to string. That said, I remove this buffer here and it will be a very good string. So what has happened is that this one is a synchronous operation and it is very good because it does not break the flow of execution. So this, when it has come, it was working, then it has found that it has now been flowing, the code has been flowing. Then it has found out that this one is a synchronous operation and that just wait for the file to be loaded, to be executed. Now, it is so that this one can be executed before this one has been executed. And so, this one has been executed while this one has been placed somewhere, while being running at the background. Then after this one has run, this one has been displayed. That is now what has worked here. So, that is reading file synchronously. Reading file synchronously. We can maybe have a look on how we do our writing. Write.txt, write.js. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just coming here and I'm going to copy this because we don't have to keep on retyping. And if it was in Python, we would just have imported, but let me just work with this. So you can just do that. Just working in the same file. So I'm going to say what? We are going to read this one using, we are going to write using synchronous way. I'm going to say try catch error. I'm going to say console an error. An error occurred. Just a minute. Just a minute. I want to. Just a minute. I was checking on something there, so don't worry about it. So I'm going to say error.message. So an error occurred. Then you can now say we want to write on this file. So let's assume we are working on a file called write.txt. Then I can now say fs.write async. Then this I can now give it something like file name. And remember, this file does not exist. So what will be given here is the content. I'm going to write which. I'm going to say Dennis knows coding. Then with that, I can now come and say console.log file written successfully. Then with that, I can now come here and execute this node write.js. So this file has been written successfully. What has happened is that what this write file async does is that it checks whether this file exists, and if this file does not exist, it creates the file. Now, if this file exists and this file has content, what happens is that it overwrites on top of the content. So if I come now here, then it knows how to code. Now this one has been printed. What has happened is that it has created this file and has written that content. If we maybe do this thing asynchronous way, I can just come and say what? I can now come and say let's use what? Let's use can now come and say what? Can now come and say let's use fs.write file. Use it asynchronous way. Let's use asynchronous way. Then we can now come here and say which content are we writing. It's called vibe coding. Is helping some individuals. Now, with that said, I can now come here and say, can now check whether there is an error. Then with that, I can say, if error, I can now come and say, console.log an error occurred while writing the file. Then I can now come and print this error. I can say error.message. Then with that I can now come and say else. Now this has to be, let me just remove this else. After you find this error, you should return and avoid further processing of the code. So I can now come here and say console.log this file file properly written. Then with that I can maybe execute and see file properly written. If I come now here to this write.txt, I find out that the content that was inside has been overwritten. That content has been overwritten. Now think of a scenario whereby we want to append the content of the file. Now for that reason, let us now work with synchronous programming. Let us now append the content of this file. So what we want now to add content here, we don't want to delete the existing content. So what we are going to do, I'm going to use fs.append file. I'm going to say file name. What do we want to append? I want to append in the line below. I want to append that although vibe coding is good, we need to learn. We need it to learn. So I can now come here, say, so this one is the content I have appended. Then I can now say, this errors is just the same. So I can copy this and say, just copy this, bring it here. So it's just the error. Then this one is a callback, of course. Then it's going to return something. I'm going to say an error occurred while appending the file this way. File properly appended. Then I can now come and execute this. File properly appended. So this appending takes two parameters. Number one is the file name. It has some series of parameters. File name, content of what we want to append. Then there has to be a mechanism through which you catch up the error. So there is an error there. Then we catch. Now if there is this error, we should display the error and return the code to avoid further execution. Now if I come here and say this write file to see what has happened, is that vibe coding is helping some individuals. Yes, although vibe coding is good, we need to learn. So this content has been appended there. This content has been appended there. Now let us look at a scenario. Let us look at a scenario whereby I can just delete everything. Let us look at a scenario whereby you want to maybe probably append. You want to read from a certain file, but before you read, you want to know whether that file really exists. So how do we come up that way? We need to know whether that file first exists before we read. So we have our file here. You can now come here and say fs.existsync. You can say if fs.existsync, if that file exists, if fs.existsync, then it's going to have to receive the file name. If that file exists, what we want to do is we want to read the content. If this file does not exist, we want to create a file. So what happens is very simple. I'm going to say fs.read file. I'm going to say file name. Then with this file name, I'm going to say UTF-8. Then I'm going to say error. This one is going to receive a callback, error, and data. Then I can now return this. I can now come here and say this file really exists. So this file now exists. So I can say console.log. I can now check if error console.log. This, there was a problem reading from the file. Then you can now display the error there, error, that message. There was a problem reading from the file, then else. Then with this I can now maybe return because we don't want further processing. Then this I can now come here as console.log data. Then with that said, if this file does not exist, we can now create, can now say fs.write file. We need to remove this async, create file, write file. So we are going to write file name. What do we want to write? Software engineering is cool. That way, then I can now say error. Then we can now come here and return. Can say if this now error exists, we can now come say and say console. Maybe you can just copy this, come and paste here. Can come and say there was a problem writing to the file. Now I can now come here and say else console.log file written successfully. Now with that said, I can now come here and do what? Do execute that one. So vibe coding is helping some individuals. Although vibe coding is good, we need to learn. Now what has happened? This file exists. So this file exists. So this file having existing, this content has been printed. Now let's come here and change how this file is called. I come here and name writer. I've changed the name of the file, meaning this file does not exist already. So I can now run. So file written successfully. So we have written another file because it has checked that file does not exist. We have created now this file. Now let's see, we have now checked that file written successfully. Now let's now come here and say const data is equals to fs.readFileSync. Let's use file name. So this file name I'm going to say file name we are going to say utf8. Then I'm going to say console.log data. So we already read the file, then we write to the file, then we read the content of the file. Now I can come here, it's called write. I can now delete this file. Let's delete it. Now after deleting, I can now execute Node. So if I execute, software engineering is cool. So file written successfully, software engineering is cool. So file written successfully, it has been read. Now if I come now and execute it again, this the top file, because now this file exists, it will not be printed. So it should just be software engineering is cool. Now this is just the basic way of maybe we do file handling, and to do them in a certain systematic way. Now you can look at this this chaining here. If this chaining is not cool, maybe particularly before I show you something, but this chaining is not cool. We would like to write our code in a more neat way. Now we would like to write our code in a more neat way. So how do we do that? Maybe before we go there, let us have a look on how we create how maybe, because we have checked on appending, reading, and the writing. Let us have a look on how we do deleting. So we can now come here and say, create another folder and we call it delete delete.js. Delete.js. So with this, I can now come and say what? Const fs is equals to require fs. So const path is equals to require path. Now with that said, I can now come here and say want to delete this file called writer. So I can now come here and say we use something called fs dot unlink. Unlink want to delete that file. So we are going to say this file is going to be, this file is called path.join. Want to get this file, then delete it. .join. We are joining, we see in directory name. Then here I'm going to say .join what? Path.join. I'm going to join write .txt fs unlink path.join this way. So I'm going to say error here. We are going to check whether there was an error during unlinking. If error, can now say console.log problem. There was a problem deleting the file, and with that I can now come here and say error dot message. Now I can just put a semicolon to make, then I can now come here and say return, because you don't want now this file to, this code now to keep on executing. So with that I can now come here and say console file deleted, file deleted, file deleted. So I can now come here and say node delete, file deleted successfully. File, so we have deleted write.txt. You can no longer see the file. We have already deleted that file. Now we delete any file using unlink. Unlink. We use unlink. We use unlink to delete any file. Now, with that said, we have seen now how to delete files. But remember, with this kind of arrangement of our code, it is not neat. So I want to show you how to write a neat code. So this one is working properly. This one is working properly. This. Now, let us have a look on how we create maybe folder and how we create or maybe we remove folders. So I can now say fs make directory. Which directory? That directory is going to be called what? What is the name of that directory? I'm going to call it files. Then this is going to receive an error as a parameter of this callback function. Then I'm going to copy this and I'm going to say what? I'm going to say if error, there was a problem making the folder. So it will just be there was a problem making the folder. So folder created. Here will be folder created. But now you have to, but remember this one, we have already deleted this file. So this one will throw an error already, but you have handled that error. You have caught that error. Let's see. Let me just run it. So folder created. So there was a problem deleting the file because that file is not there and this is the error. Now, folder created. This folder, we have created it successfully. This folder. Now, let us see how we remove it. So I just copy that and I say remove. Just be remove directory. That way, there was a problem deleting. This one will be deleting the folder. So it will be folder deleted. That way, and I can now come here and execute it. and now run. Folder deleted. So there was a problem making the folder exist. File already exists. Yeah. So it will be. So there was this problem making this folder because we had already made it, and so we have deleted it. So generally, we do that file reading, file writing. We delete, we append, then we make folder, we delete folder. There's those operations. But we want now to look at the best way to handle this so that we can write clean function using async and wait. So how do we do that? We come here and say, index.js. This one is working properly. I can just come here and edit everything. I can say const fs is equals to require fs. Then I can say const path is equals to require path. Then with that said, I can now come and say what? Come and say const fs is equals to require fs dot promises, like that. So we are using this something called promises. So what I'm going to do, we want now to maybe read from this file using now this criteria using promises. We will now come and say create const, and let me use async function. Async function read from file. Async function read from file. Then we want now to read from that file. We want to read from one file. Maybe to look at how we write better code. So with that said, I'm now going to do this. I'm going to define my file here that I'm going to work with. Let file name is equals to path.join. Path.join directory name. Then with that, I'm going to join. Let's see the one that has this one. Let's use this writer.txt. Writer.txt. So async. So here I can say try catch. Problem. Say problem reading from the file. Problem reading from the file. Now this I can now come here and say that file name can now come and say const data is equals to await file name dot not file name await fs dot read file. So I'm awaiting this read file, going to receive file name, then it will be utf8 that way. Then I can now say console.log data that way. Now this I can now come here and say this function here can now come here and say read from file and see everything. So that said, I can now I have executed that code again. I can now say node index. Oh, I had already declared this. This is a major blunder I've done. So let's see. Now execute. So vibe coding is helping some individuals. Although vibe coding is good, we need to learn. So we have read this using this operation. Now this one is a synchronous way. Now let us check out how we read, how we write using this. This is just the same. So async function write to file. Then I can now come and see and say try, catch, error, problem, writing to the file. Then I can now come here and say await fs.write file. Can just come up with create another file, call it index.txt. Then I can say like that. There's no need of, then I can say console.log file written successfully. Then this one will obviously receive content. So we'll do testing clean code. Then with that I can just come and say write file. Then I can execute that, and with that I can now run everything. So file written successfully. So file written successfully. So these are synchronous operations. That's why this one has occurred first, then followed by this one. So that's how we do these things when we are dealing with read from file. So there is the read from file, there is write to file using fs promises. So maybe let's have a look on now. Maybe from where we will begin from the next session. So we have checked on reading, writing, appending, and all of that. So if it was maybe, let me just come back here. If it was maybe appending, it will be, let me just copy this. It will be just that. Then I'll just put here append. Then I can just come here and put the next line. Testing clean code is better. File appended. Problem appending. And I can now come here and say can now come here and say, let's check whether that file exists. Let's see how we check it. So with that I can say I want to check it synchronously. So do I need to check it synchronously, or okay, there's no problem. Let me just comment this. I will demonstrate something. Let me comment that, and let me just execute this and say, right, this one will be append. Then I'm going to say append. I'm going to create everything. So file appended successfully. So these are asynchronous operations. That's why they are not following each other synchronously. So if I come here and say index.txt, you see that has been appended. Now, I wanted to show you something. Let me just do this like this. Then I can just come here and comment everything. I want to show you how to delete file synchronously way. How to delete file synchronously. So how do we do that? We do fs. Now let me come here and remove these promises. We do fs what? Access. Want to check now. Want to check whether this file exists synchronously way, in a synchronously way. So fs.access this file called writer.txt. Is it their file name? Let's see. Okay, this file name. So it will be fs.constants constants.f.ok, like that. Then that's it. I'm going to say then we are going obviously to have an error there to check the error. So this is the function fs.access. This one is we want to check whether this file name exists synchronously. So you are going to say if error console.log file exists, file does not exist, file does not exist. And does not exist, then you can now say console. Then you have to return. And I can say console.log file exists. And I can just run this. So file exists. So file exists. This is a way of checking whether the file exists synchronously. So if you run this, the file exists. So you could have just implanted this one inside and check whether everything is okay. So I can just comment this and then comment everything here. So that's how we do these things. So we have checked everything. Now I want now to introduce a very short thing that will begin from. If I now come here and create another folder called 1.2, and I'm going to call it I'm going to call it index.html. Then from here I'm going just to say that I'm going to input. I'm going to have an input tag like that. And I'm going to have let me just say drop input type file. Then I'm going to open this using our browser. Now the next time we will begin now from this. How to append files here. How to now upload and append files. We'll begin from here. Maybe you can just have a look of what we'll be doing. You can just say that said. I can say maybe probably what we are going to check is we are going to check ID. We're going to have an ID called file input. Yeah, the type is file, then ID file input. Then I can now come here and say script is document. Then I'm going to say document dot get element by ID file input. Then I'm going to say add event listener. Then what we are going to do, we are going now to say change. We are going to notice the change. Then after the change will be I want to execute this function. Then this one will be event. So what will happen is we want to have this file. So after this I'm going to have event.target.files. From files we pull the first file. Then we are going to check whether this file exists, if this file has been pulled from the file stream. Then I'm going to say const reader is equals to new reader. That could be file reader. File reader, then you are going to say reader.onload. Onload. After onload, you need to execute this function console.log file contents. File contents, then you have a dot target dot result. Then you can now come here and say reader dot read as text. Then we are going to read from that file that way. So with this set, I can now execute. If I just come here and say just come here and pull from this, and I just want some document from good document, Turing data writing, writing, readme proposal. Let's see, prediction. Let me just pull this. Let's see. So this is the content of this file. So we have already read this. So I can probably come and say can have a p there, can call it class file contents. Class, I can just call it an ID, just file contents. Then I can now come here and say now come here and say document.get element by ID. Then I can now come here and say inner content, inner text. The document dot get element by ID. Then I can now come here and say, what is this element? This element is file contents. So I'm going to copy it, going to paste it here. Then I'm going to say dot inner text is equals to what? Is equals to a dot target dot result. That way. So with that, I can now come here and say, can now refresh, check if everything is okay. Then I can now come here and upload the test data. So this is the test data of that file. So we have now read this file and have printed it on the HTML document. So enough of that is set for today, and I'm going to begin from that point in the next session. So what has happened in this channel is that I have not yet validated it, so I cannot post my URL to the GitHub in the description, but I'm going to do that, and after that I'm going to paste every URL of any kind of video I've done to the description. So with that, you can maybe subscribe so that you can help this channel grow, and you can maybe continue touching more people while you are inspiring more people to begin their journey in tech. So thank you and have a nice day.